Can spiritual values be the foundation of corporate success? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is CEO of Unity World Headquarters, Jim Blake. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and on KCAA Radio here in Southern California. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, it's the interview portion of our show on Guys Radio, and today we're going to talk about Zen, the Zen executive, kind of the synchronicity between spirituality and business, and maybe there's a question mark after that. You know, today's business environment requires a new kind of leader, one who's got empathy, flexibility, but how do you bring this type of clarity and vision to your business? In his new book, my special guest, Jim Blake, this book is called The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim looks at practical spirituality as the foundation of good leadership. Drawing from his experience as CEO of the 130-year-old spiritual nonprofit Unity World Headquarters, that you may be familiar with, the Daily Word, I just resubscribed, and a lifetime in corporate leadership, Jim provides advice on how to lead teams, companies, and communities while maintaining alignment to our principles and integrity. Jim is the CEO of Unity World Headquarters, where he previously served as Chief Information Officer, VP of Operations. Unity is a spiritual nonprofit founded in 1889 in Kansas City, Missouri. It helps people of all faiths and cultures apply positive spiritual principles to their daily lives. And Jim illustrates his ideas with stories from his own experience. And the name of the book, once again, is The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Welcome back to Guys Radio. We had a production issue on my end, but so we're doing it again. So welcome back, Jim, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start right at the beginning with the big picture. What inspired you to come back to a nonprofit? You were in a nonprofit, you got back into the more traditional corporate world, and you had some changes you went through and came back to the nonprofit. Now you're CEO of Unity World Headquarters.
Yeah, so you're right, I was here and I left for about 5 years, and I was in a global leading organization in energy management, as well as a global leader in traffic management systems. My background is largely in IT, and I found the work obviously quite rewarding. I learned a lot about what it takes to be a global leader in terms of culture and people and innovation, and that was all well and good. But in 2015, my oldest daughter passed away after a bout with cancer.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And when something like that occurs, much like the pandemic over the last few years, you sort of re-examine your perspectives and your values and what's important. And not that those weren't beautiful and wonderful organizations I worked with, they absolutely were. Certainly value the experience I got there. But I left that experience with my daughter feeling like I wanted to do more. In the chemo waiting rooms and in the hospitals, I saw people really struggling with what was happening. Not only those afflicted, but the family members really struggling with how to cope. And as I looked around the rest of the world, I see things like dis-ease, being at its highest level, anxiety, stress. And so it really left me at this place where I wanted to go work somewhere where I could have an impact on those things, where I could provide tools and resources to help people through the everyday struggles. And Unity World Headquarters provided me that opportunity. They do a lot of booklets and books and tools on how to deal with those things from a spiritual perspective. And so it felt really important to me, and it was a great decision, and I'm certainly glad to be here.
Okay, well, congratulations on your wonderful work you're doing. The concept or the idea of spirituality in business, some people who are in business would say, I'm about the bottom line, and however we get there, it's just win baby type of thing. Or maybe they give a nod to, spirituality, but it's a slippery slope sometimes to try to weave spirituality into the business world. And just that term itself can be polarizing to some people who might say, oh, that's all woo-woo stuff. That's not for us here. Yeah. How does an executive start to begin to integrate the foundations of spirituality without, hitting people over the head with, being preaching about it?
Sure. So let's differentiate. We're not talking about religion in the workplace. We're talking about spirituality, which is a more fundamental aspect of approaching life in terms of compassion and empathy, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And so you can what I think where I think people often make this disconnect is just where you started. It's all about profit and productivity. And so they come in and they lead heavy-handed or with fear and intimidation or command and control, demanding performance. And in the book, what I talk about is you can get there and even greater performance increases and greater engagement in your culture by doing just the opposite. It's when you lead with compassion, and people say, well, how are you going to hold people accountable if you lead with compassion? Well, you can do that. It's not they're not mutually exclusive. So I can still hold someone accountable as to whether or not they're performing their function, but I can do it in a humane way and in a conversational tone. I don't have to berate them and belittle them into trying to perform at a greater level. And so when you take the time to provide your associates with a great work environment, all the tools and resources they need, as a leader, you step in and remove any obstacles that are hindering them from performing at their highest level. When they feel seen and heard and appreciated, and when you provide the proper work-life balance, so just think about that. They are more productive than they ever have been. And here's why. If you're being yelled at every single day and you're scared to death of making a mistake, you're in a constant state of stress and anxiety. You take that home with you. It impacts your whole life. That's why so many people have heart attacks on Monday mornings, right? Or Sunday nights. Versus if I feel seen and heard and supported, and I love my culture and I love the leaders and the people I work with, I have no stress and no anxiety. So my performance level is at its optimum because I have no other distractions and I'm happy and content. And so it's really quite the opposite. So many people are afraid to make that leap because they feel like if they're not pushing people, they won't get the productivity one. And I'm here to tell you that just the opposite is true. The greater work-life balance and the more compassionate you are with those you lead, the greater engagement and productivity you will have.
Now, a lot of companies nowadays attracting Gen Z, et cetera, they'll have like basketball court or popcorn machine or places to meditate or whatever. How does a company and a leader be careful that doesn't become window dressing or just a way to keep your employees at the office instead of living full productive lives? I've always been one that thought that you got to do your time in the office, you got to, or at your company, whether it's remote or not, and then you have to have your own life also, and that'll make you a better employee. How does a leader balance all that stuff to make sure you're offering things for the employees that are expected nowadays, but not having it come across as like window dressing and saying, okay, this is kind of here's our meditation room. Now, here's the bottom line. How do you come across in kind of a balanced way with this, Jim?
Sure. So you mentioned the word early on. It's about integrity and authenticity. So if on one hand I'm doing ping pong tables and meditation rooms, and I'm showing you all these things, but on the other hand, I'm leading through fear and intimidation, and I'm cutting vacation time wherever I can, and I'm minimizing your employee benefits plan, it's pretty clear that those aren't in alignment. And so when you're in integrity with the overall effort of putting your associates first, that is seen and felt. And so there's a big difference. So yes, I have the meditation room, and I see you're reaching out in this way by enhancing our benefits package. I see that you're staying up to date with proper market increases in terms of my salary. I see that we have a quarterly social where I can connect. You demonstrate through family picnics every summer that you're committed to our families. And so I think if those two things are in alignment, it comes through as authentic and an integrity. But if there's a disconnect between the two offerings, then I think that's where you get in trouble.
My special guest, Jim Blake, the CEO of the Unity World Headquarters and author of the new book, The Zen Executive Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim, it seems like the change always starts with oneself. So for you to go on the mission you're on now, I'm sure you had to go look inside and do some work on yourself. And when you work on yourself, I think we can agree that it affects other people in a positive way. And the best thing you can do to change the world is change yourself. What did you do for yourself that put you in a position to be able to impact so many people in such a positive way?
Wow, that is such a great question. And you are so 100% right on. Everything we do in life is an inside job. And so whether it's leadership or your own personal growth, it starts with where you are internally. And I will tell you, the biggest obstacle I had to overcome for me was my own bout with my own self-worth. I grew up with a stepfather who had served in the military, was probably suffering from undiagnosed PTSD during my formative years. And so I experienced a lot of verbal abuse and a lot of not being good enough. And so it took me a long time to do two things. Number one, unwind all that and become very comfortable with who I am individually and get to know myself. But number two, stop worrying about what everybody else thinks. So we all are almost slaves to this idea of they. What will they think? What will they say? Well, who is they? There is no collective they that is watching everything we do in our lives. And so the more we can sort of get comfortable with, I want to wear crazy socks, or I want to do this, I want to dress this way, I want to do this for a living, and stop trying to please other people, the more we get in touch with our authentic self. And when we get in touch with our authentic self, we then open ourselves up to really moving down a path that enriches our lives. And so that includes things like you begin to set appropriate boundaries. And the more you do the things that you like and that bring you joy, the more content you are. And so, to your point, you then begin to express in a different way and you see the world in a different way. I'm hoping that makes sense, but it really has to do, with your own, what I call self-awareness. And there are tons of books out there on self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And sometimes you have to do the hard work. So I had to look and identify what my triggers were. So what were the things that triggered me either emotionally, one way or the other? I had to process what that was, make peace with it, so that was no longer a trigger that was holding me back from achieving what I wanted to achieve. So yeah, I would recommend as much work as you can do in the area of self-awareness will truly, truly benefit you in reaching your highest potential.
Well stated, well stated. So you talk about 5 principles. I want to get into the 5 principles and kind of the 4 steps, the 4 foundations of the work you're doing. So the 5 principles: God is a source, the universe is all there is and present everywhere. Human beings are individual expressions. Thoughts have creative power. Prayer and meditation keep us aligned. And it is not enough to understand spiritual teachings when we must live it. Talk to us a little bit about these principles. I think they're terrific. And then what was your first step coming into your organization, coming back to it, to implement some of these things? What did you see that needed to change, and what did you do so it didn't become like a sticker shock, like, oh no, holy rollers coming back to the organization? You wanted it to be a positive change that people could really get behind. Tell us about these principles and how did you start to implement them?
So those are the 5 fundamental principles that undergird the unity teachings that were founded in the late 1800s, like you mentioned. And so the idea that there is this omnipresent intelligence that is behind everything in the universe, right? And then the real powerful idea is that the understanding that your thoughts, words, and actions create your experiences. So what that means is, I'm not talking about The Secret here, where I think about a new car and all of a sudden I get a new car. What I'm talking about is the posture that you hold internally in your mind each and every day. We all have the chattering mind that is constantly chattering away. Every single one of us does. For a long time, I thought that was just me, but I learned we all have it. And often it's really, really critical. And so that your mindset impacts your everyday experience. If you're walking around telling yourself that I am the unluckiest person alive, then every single thing that happens, you frame it in that lens. See, I told you, I'm the unluckiest person ever. Versus if you shift that perspective and say, I am open to the possibilities of, this being a great day, or I'm the luckiest person alive, then you start to see the whole world with that lens, and it begins to build momentum. So it really does change your perception of how you see the world. Your mental framing is determining how you experience the world. So that's what we mean when we say thoughts and words relate to your experience of life. And then as it relates to prayer and meditation, look, and all of these things we're talking about, this isn't just Jim's philosophy. Everything I talk about in the book has data behind it these days. People have done studies about the power of positive thinking and a positive mindset, people have done studies about the power of meditation and what happens. Meditation is really about quieting that chattering mind. Because what happens is when you're just constantly in that thought spiral, you're not really present to what is around you, number one. But number two, you leave no room for inspiration or guidance. So you hear people talk about intuition. That's not just reserved for psychics and gifted people in that way. We all have an innate intuition and access to this intelligence. Meditation is about quieting the mind enough so that you can create a space for that inspiration and that guidance to come forth. And so the more you do it, the more you begin to experience aha moments that we have all had at one time or another. The more you begin to experience little synchronicities in life. And it's all related to the idea that you've gotten yourself out of this spiral of the chattering mind and created some space for inspiration and guidance. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about the four core sections really also in the book, that your guiding principles that you need to have as an effective leader, the mission statement as a work-centric practice, making the mission statement your own, and then living it in everyday life. You want to expand on that a little bit, Jim? Because now we're taking the principles, we're putting them into the foundation of what can turn into practices.
Yeah, you have segued this beautifully, by the way. So we just talked about how thoughts and words and emotions can sort of impact our experience of life. And often in spiritual circles, you'll hear people talk about affirmations, which are just really sentences of positive statements. Why are they necessary? Well, an affirmation can help you break out of a negative thinking spiral, right? So instead of saying I'm worthless, you can say I am worthy, and that becomes your affirmation. Well, if I translate that to a corporate culture, you create a mission statement that has some real meaning to everyone in the organization that serves there. You are now basically adhering to a collective affirmation. And so now you've got your whole organization that connects deeply with whatever this affirmative statement is, and it begins to guide their work. So for us, ours was to help and serve people through prayer, publishing, and community. So what stuck for our associates was to help and serve. So now the entire culture has become all about service, largely because we have this mission statement that we refer to all the time. We use it to guide our business decisions. If we're going to make an investment or create a new product, our first question is always, does this support our mission of helping and serving? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then we should probably look at something else. So a mission statement can have that kind of power. It can be a touchstone for how you do business and the decisions you make, but it's also really a rallying cry for everyone to get behind so that you're all moving in the same direction.
So when you came into your new role,
Mhm.
what are the things, if you don't mind my asking, did you implement to get to jumpstart this process, to get everybody on board, to make that connection with your team that say, okay, this is where we're going and this is how we're going to do it. And instead of just being a mission statement, yeah, and then people forget about it. How did you have your team live it?
So the first thing we had to do, the culture had grown pretty stale. And people were really focused on everything that was broken instead of anything that was working. And the prosperity consciousness, the idea of being successful had sort of faded because many things were on a downward trend. So I did a couple of things. The first thing I had to do was let everybody know that there was going to be a whole bunch of change coming. And so I instituted an affirmation for everyone that said, change is our friend. So I want you to remember, over the next 3 years, we're going to be doing a lot of changes, and change is our friend. And you explain the idea that change is the only constant in the universe. Look around nature. Nothing stays static. If it does, it's dying or decaying. And so I prepared the whole organization that we're going to be in this really great state of change over the next few years. And then secondly, I did, are you familiar with Simon Sinek's work?
Yes, I used to work. He put 2 offices down from me in an ad agency in New York, Ammirati Pures Lintas. I know. I'm not like his buddy or anything, but I know him in terms of he was a colleague.
So he's famous for the exercise around my why. And everyone that was serving here was largely here because they felt it was noble, right? It's a spiritual nonprofit. And so I had everyone re-examine their why. Why are you here? And we took out cards and everybody wrote down their why. and they kept those at their desk, and we took pictures of associates with their why and put it up on bulletin boards in different places around campus. And it sort of helped everyone reset as to, oh yeah, this is why I'm here. We started putting forth testimonials and success stories of those that we serve and how they were moved by the work that we were doing. And so that really shifted everybody out of the negativity and reset sort of everyone's compass as to why they were here. So now they're present with why they're here. They're feeling good about their work again. We're sharing success. We redid the mission statement with their input. And it sort of, and then we know there's a whole bunch of change coming, right? Because we said that. And so that was really the foundation to change the culture. And then from there, it really just becomes about action. So we started doing some innovation in the work that we were doing and having some success, and then recommunicating how that was successful and what their contributions were to it. And, you know, a handful of those, one right after the other, and you begin to really build some great momentum, and people start believing in themselves again. And we started turning some of the numbers around. And so then people really felt like they were being successful, and it just all builds upon itself. But you kind of have to start with that fresh foundation, as it were.
So putting all this into action, if you will, the world's best laid plans sometimes go awry. You must have had things come up that you weren't anticipating, and you had to respond with. Like Mike Tyson always says, you can have a great plan until you get punched in the face. So what did you run into personally as a CEO in terms of, oh, I wasn't expecting this, here's what I need to do, whether it's about yourself or it's about how you interface with the team, the mission statement, just the day-to-day vibe and the environment and the culture? What was the challenge that you had that you weren't necessarily expecting when you got into your role?
I'll give you two things. So when the board chose me, they chose me specifically because of my technology background and the years of innovation, automation, and enhancement I had done throughout my career. And so they really wanted to bring that level of change to the organization because it needed it. It needed a dramatic turnaround. And what I will tell you is, it's one thing for them to say they want it, but when I began to bring forth all of these significant changes in strategy and direction, I was met with some resistance. And that took me aback, because in every interview I participated in, my peers on the leadership team and the board, we want great change. And yet they were really resistant to some of the changes. And so I learned that I had to really slow things down. I had to provide a lot more information. I wasn't going to get to the things I wanted to at the pace I wanted to. In fact, I had to do them in smaller bite sizes so that people could see it and then believe it, because they just weren't ready for the magnitude that I came out with. And so that was a real challenge for me. There were times where I was wondering, why am I here? You wanted me here for all this change. I'm trying to do it, and I was getting resistance. And so, but I just slowed everything down, took some smaller steps, and then that momentum began to really build on itself. The second thing I would say is, I work on a 1,200 acre campus that's been here for 100 years. And when I got here, it has 465,000, this is just an example, 465,000 square feet of office space. And the population had shrunk, our employee population had shrunk down to where we're using about a third of that space, which means there was 2/3 of this campus, which is a beautiful, stunning campus, that was sitting empty and mothballed. And so that didn't seem, it seemed wasteful to me. It wasn't prudent. And so one of the things I suggested we do was begin to lease some of this space to other organizations, like-minded organizations. And I'll tell you that made a whole lot of people really, really nervous, because for the first time ever, they were going to have people that other than, Unity affiliated,
different culture,
on campus. And so there was a lot of concern about that. And I took a lot of flack for that. And I'll tell you, early on in my career as a CEO, I took a lot of the criticism and commentary personally, somewhat. But I'll tell you the other thing that happened that I have since resolved. It made me question my vision. I had a very clear vision of where I was headed and what I thought was possible. And when these stark criticisms would come forth, I would pause and begin to question, well, maybe I'm not right here. Maybe this is a mistake. And so fortunately for me, I had a trusted coach that I was working with at that time. And, he sort of helped me see, which do you trust? Do you trust this feedback more, or do you trust the intuition and the guidance and the vision that you got for what this can be. Which do you believe more? And to his credit, I certainly believed in my vision more. And so I was able to, despite the criticism, move ahead. And sure enough, everything turned out the way we wanted. But I share that story to say, you're going to get criticized. You're going to get challenges when you're creating great change. And my advice would be to really contemplate which you believe more before you waver. Because sometimes we'll get thrown off course by someone's idea of what's right or wrong. And so I just caution you that you may meet that kind of resistance, and just stay the course. If you really believe in it, stay the course, and it will come to fruition. So those were probably the two examples of some really big challenges I faced coming back.
Jim Blake, you're doing terrific work. You're a beacon for other leaders who want to integrate more of the right-minded, quote unquote, spiritual foundation into their work. Thank you for doing that. The name of the book is The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim Blake, where can more people find out about you and your organization?
Yep. So obviously the book is on Amazon.com. You can also find a lot about me and the book at IamJimBlake.com. And then finally, if you're interested in some of the spiritual tools and resources I mentioned earlier, available from Unity, you can find that at unity.org.
Fantastic. Great job. Keep up doing the good work you're doing. It's needed. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for having me on and for all the good work you're doing in the world. I appreciate it.
You enjoy the content and guests I bring you each and every week to Guys Radio and TV. Please support us by subscribing to our channels. Thank you.